Thank you everyone for being here and for attending such a wonderfully informative day here. And I can't tell you how honored that Silverado is to be a sponsor and to partner with ElderWorks. They are an amazing company that does amazing work. We're very grateful to be a part of that relationship. Silverado is, I'm actually my name's Jackie Mulshine. I'm a family ambassador from Silverado, St. Charles. We are located right on Route 64, across from what used to be the old Pheasant Run. Our community has been open just a little over 2.5 years. We are a 90-bed community that does nothing other than memory care. All of our caregivers are dementia care certified. On a grander scale, Silverado is a nationwide company. We have 22 long-term care communities in 6 states across the country. We offer long-term care as well as respite services. And we are just, once again, very honored to be here and participate in this wonderful day. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Forrest. Dr. Forrest offers education and support through her Dementia Coach on Call services to family and professional caregivers seeking guidance on Alzheimer's and other related dementias. She served as faculty member at the University of Illinois at Chicago and Rush University. She held board positions for the Illinois Hospice and Palliative Care Organization and Chicago End of Life Care Coalition. Dr. Forrest provided palliative care and dementia education in various regions of China. In collaboration with the Dementia Society of America, Dr. Forrest offers free monthly national webcasts called Dementia Unplugged Care Conversations. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Forrest.
Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate the support from ElderWorks and the sponsors, and it's a joy to be here on this blustery cold day in Chicago. All right, and Emily, we'll see how this works and if I need your additional support. So, a long day, right? An informative day, and I'm hoping that we can all see how this is gelling together. Because at this point, you don't want to wait for a crisis. But how do we plan for future need, right? Have you ever felt that you were just so overwhelmed that you were just drowning in all the responsibilities and care and didn't know where to turn? And this is kind of why I started my private practice. Families would come to me and say, wow, we wish we would have known about you years ago. We felt like we were lost in the forest, and hence the reason for Through the Forest actually being the name of my company that offers Dementia Coach on Call. But the idea here is you want to prevent things upstream whenever possible. So I'm going to see if I can switch, and it doesn't look like it. It looks like it's frozen, Emily. So let's go to the next one. Often what I see as a practitioner is that I have family members who will say, well, that'll never happen to me. You know, my mom is even afraid to leave me. So the thought that she would leave the house in the middle of the night, well, you know, that'll never happen. Or it could be, oh, I wish I would have known X, Y, Z, right? I wish I would have known about ways to prevent weight loss towards later stages of dementia. Or I wish I would have known that my mom had a bladder infection and it wasn't the dementia getting worse. And so my goal here is to give you a little more of an aerial view, not necessarily the nuts and bolts of all of this, but to have you identify perhaps through a checklist of what you may not be anticipating. When you're in and often thrown into the capacity as a caregiver, you don't know what you don't know. And so I'm just grateful that many of you are reaching out for assistance through many of these wonderful organizations. And this is what I try to do with family caregivers. Next slide, please. So if you could use this mantra or write it down, educate, anticipate, partner, and plan, meaning educate yourself if you're the person with the dementia or a care provider, anticipate whenever we can, partner, you're going to see how important it is to partner with a buddy, and then plan. Plan as best we can, maybe I should say straw plan, but it helps one feel as if they're just not stuck, that they at least have a template, an outline of what they might want to do in the event of certain situations. Next, please. So the idea here is, instead of feeling like you're drowning, I'm going to help you create a safety net. So if you need it, when you need it, it's there. Next, please. Having said that, I have to say that there's no 100% foolproof plan. How many of us, even a year ago, could have imagined being in a global pandemic, right? There's no way. Perhaps Bill Gates, but for most of us, it was hard to plan for the full impact of this worldwide pandemic. So we can do our best, and we could also use that phrase, man plans and God laughs, right? You've heard that. But I think just to have a better sense of going forward and some degree of control, it helps to create this safety net. But realize we can't figure it all out all the time. Next. So I wanted to start out with, what is a crisis? What do we mean by crisis? I've worked with families where sort of everything seems to be a crisis. And so I use this mantra for myself, that mind creates reality. Mind creates reality. And one of the beginning questions I ask families when I start to work with them, but what would a crisis mean to you? And that really depends on individuals' level of education, their experience, their other sort of superimposed responsibilities. Are they under chronic stress? And all of those components will really inform me of can someone handle this sort of next step, or is it just too much and do we need to bring in additional support? But in general, the word crisis can mean a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger. It is a decision point, but not just any decision. It's a difficult decision, and it's a period that may be ambiguous, and we don't know if the decision will lead to more instability or more of a dangerous situation. And so that's why, crisis, I'd like to come to a common definition when I'm working with families. Next, please. So for people living with, people caring for people with various types of dementias, there are some watch outs. And this is where I have people kind of jot them down on paper. I have a little journal that I create, and I put my safety net on the top, and I have people list these potential watch outs that you may or may not know about, right? Again, people don't know what they don't know. And what are the most common situations where one needs to make rather immediate decisions? And I'll list those now, and then we'll talk about them in a little more detail. But certainly falls or injuries within the home, broken hips, broken anything can certainly cause individuals to be in a tailspin. elopement, meaning moving away from the one's premise, not just, taking a walk outside the home, but getting lost and, family's not sure where that person is. And there's a real risk for danger. Delirium. Delirium is also known as acute confusion. Delirium is very different than dementia. It usually indicates some medical emergency, and I'll talk about that in more detail. But in general, some people think the delirium is just, quote, the dementia getting worse, when in fact, this is a reversible, in many situations, underlying condition. I'm going to put aggression, potential harm to self and others in sort of asterisk. Typically, this does not come on very suddenly. It can escalate, but there are signs and symptoms and ways of potentially preventing this from happening altogether. This is where the one-to-one coaching I see really becomes impactful. And my goal is to never have that happen, or to identify situations where that can. And so we put in preventative measures so it never gets to this boiling point. Acute infection. We certainly have to be mindful of COVID as an overlay and how that has changed the entire landscape when we talk about sudden emergent situations, right? Another one that we don't always plan for, nor do we want to think about, but it is the incapacity or illness of the primary caregiver. There's so much experience, data, research on how, if you're not well prepared, well cared for, self-care, all the things that were talked about today, if those are not in place, it is not uncommon for the primary caregiver to become ill severely with depression or major stress disorders, heart attacks, this kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, the person they're caring for really is in a bind, is in a quandary. So those are the major ones I want to go over in a little more detail. And next slide, please. So part of my mantra for you is partner. And I'm going to start with that first. Wherever you are in this dementia trajectory journey as a care provider or person with dementia, choose a buddy, someone you can trust. This is a person who will learn alongside with you. For family caregivers, I usually, and then, if it's not a family member, a friend, a relative who could, again, learn aside with you, who can ask questions when things may seem to be overwhelming, to bounce ideas off of. And it's a journey. So we have the pilots, right? And I love the analogies of putting the mask on yourself first, right? Whenever you're out hiking, it's helpful to have a buddy to not only experience this adventure, but also for safety reasons. So number one, who's your buddy? Who's your partner? If you don't have one, this may be part of your plan and to-do list. Someone you can trust. Don't do this alone. It takes a village. Next, please. Another piece that I think is really important to put in place up front to prevent potential crisis later on in the dementia, when one becomes less able to make own decisions, is to put in advance directives. And that it can include end-of-life decisions. And that's not just, do I want CPR or do I not? Would I want, feeding tube, do I not? That said, it's Also important at the point when I can no longer care for myself, how comfortable do I want to be? One document that I advocate is 5 wishes. It's legal in Illinois. I use this as guiding principle. It does not require legal assistance. I know there are elder care organizations on the call, but this is one that does not. It's also, it can be adjunctive to their work as well. But the 5 questions, if you're not familiar with the 5 wishes, is who do I want to make care decisions for me when I am not able? What kind of medical treatment I do and don't want? How comfortable I want to be. Think about that. If I'm moving towards end of life, do people know that I would prefer lavender lotion for a hand massage or a back massage versus vanilla? When I was caring for my mom with her dementia, it was so important for her to have her false teeth in. And she said at end of life, please don't let me leave that room without false teeth, right? That was what comfort meant to her. Now, would I have known that? Probably not. But it is that detail that I think is so important that makes particularly end of life unique and can be elevated to a much better experience. How comfortable do I want to be? How do I want people to treat me? Who do you want to be with me? Who do you not? And what I want loved ones to know about my life and how I felt about that. So this is an excellent document. If you are not familiar, I would encourage you to take a look. You can download it. The other part is it also sort of indicates what we mean by goals of care. For some illnesses, cure is possible, right? There could be a pneumonia in an early stage of the dementia. The pneumonia is treatable. I'd want antibiotics. If we move towards very end of life, there are all sorts of reasons why repeated antibiotic therapy becomes less effective and actually can cause more harm. So that goal of care shifts. So it moves from cure to maintenance to comfort over time. Next slide, please. Another part when we're even thinking about crisis prevention is I would like to acknowledge, what does a good quality of remaining life mean to that person living with dementia? If it's you, if it's your loved one, I want to know what will sustain us even within a crisis moment. What brings you joy? What brings you comfort? I've worked with families that have said, I would like to spend some day, I would love to have been on the beach, right? Or go to a mountaintop. Well, with COVID and a variety of challenges, that's realistically not going to happen. However, we can semi-recreate that experience by literally, I've had sand brought in on a tarp with a beach umbrella and a sun lamp, and we've had tropical drinks and Caribbean music, and we've recreated this experience. So it was wonderful because it created a good quality of life, a good quality moment for a person, even in the midst of while we were, dealing with a crisis. Next, please. Along with the advanced directives and 5 wishes. This is sort of parallel. It's very important up front to identify, and this is included in the 5 wishes, your power of attorney for healthcare. That's the person that you identify as who do you trust in the event you can no longer make decisions for yourself. And unfortunately, one of the sequelae of having a dementia is that at some point the ability to, to reason, to have full capacity diminishes. And so it's important to have this document, power of attorney for healthcare, as well as finances. That said, having POAs is not only important for people with dementia, but for all of this. I educate families from age of 18 onward, regardless. We never know what could happen to us. And so the safety net is, unfortunately, I hate to say it, if we get hit by a bus tomorrow, would people know what to do in the event we couldn't speak for ourselves? So this is very important to have upfront. In addition to primary power of attorneys, I also want to include a secondary, meaning if something happens to your primary POA, who will support that person? I am primary and secondary POA, not for my clients, but for many family members. And so that's just, because of there may be an illness or that person's not available. So think about another way of preventing crisis is to have that secondary POA identified in writing. Next slide, please. Okay, my intent on this slide with this visual, what we have is a brain impacted with frontal temporal dementia. And on the left side, that is one that's still impacted, but you can see when we do a mid-sagittal section, the severe impact on a physical nature of what happens to the brain. There's shrinkage, there's vacuoles that take place within the ventricles. And the reason I do this is not for shock value or to make people, kind of scared, but caregivers and in general, if you're not living within the medical world, we're seeing that loved one with dementia and they're looking sort of the same from the outside. But what we're not seeing are these very definitive morphologic changes, cellular changes on the inside of the brain. And I believe it was Julie who was so, on target by saying, by saying that we often expect too much for someone with a dementia. The analogy I like to say is, imagine you had a cast from your thigh to your ankle, and I said, come on, let's go take a 10-mile run. You might say, well, what kind of a nurse are you, right? Well, can't you see I have a broken leg? How can you expect me to take a run when I have this broken leg? Well, often we're expecting people to do things with a broken brain. And so I use it so people can see that their loved one with the dementia, with the changes in thinking and cognitive abilities and behavioral and physical change, is not just happening to give you a hard time, but they have no control, absolutely none. And this is what's really happening. And so the onus falls on us to take the reins and learn how to love them differently, learn how to communicate differently. And it's within that, that progression that we learn how to communicate differently. And this is often one of the first reasons or ways of preventing, quote, crisis if someone becomes agitated. So learning as a caregiver what's normal for, quote, an abnormal condition is a way that I spend time with family caregivers and helping them prevent crisis. Next slide. This is just a way of looking at what I call sort of stages and the trajectory of dementia. Many individuals don't know that this dementia, the underlying cause of the dementia, often starts 15 to 20 years prior to symptom onset. I'll say that again. Many of the dementias start within the brain 15 to 20 years prior to when it comes to a point where that person changes and in behavior and thinking becomes sort of impactful on a daily basis. So you can often see signs, way in advance, and we can often, we can explain them away. Oh, they're stressed. Oh, they've got a lot to do. Oh, X, Y, Z. When in fact it really was a dementia starting, and then we move from what we call a normal cognitive ability. That squiggly line is considered MCI, or mild cognitive impairment, where people may or may not go on to a full-blown dementia. About 60 to 70% do. Next slide. Within all of this, one of the key ways of preventing a full-blown triggered sort of crisis from the point of view of communication is using this skill called empathy. Empathy is an amazing way of communicating with people with dementia, and what it relies on is your ability and skill to connect to the underlying emotional feelings and tone of person living with dementia. So on your list of your to-do list of what's important to learn, what to plan, perhaps it may be important for you to learn more about what is this empathy? How do I do it? How do I sustain it? Next slide. Another point is resource allocation, meaning it takes money, finances, to provide care, to receive care, to plan ahead for home support, aging in place, or long-term care community. This could be in and of itself a whole day symposium, correct? But I just want to acknowledge that if this is an area that you're unsure of, to bring in an elder care attorney, a care manager, and help you identify resources perhaps that you may not be aware of, to help set aside different funds, to help save for, to resource your finances differently in the event that you were to need additional long-term care or additional home support from professional services. Okay, I won't say any more about that, but just as an important, people often are surprised in how costly the care is for someone with dementia. Next slide. Safety in the home. Safety in the home, what does that mean? Well, it's not just, keeping someone from leaving the home in the middle of the night, but doing, room-to-room safety assessment checks. It was talked about earlier how, visual spatial abilities change. And so people's peripheral visions become more narrowed to more of a tunnel vision. Depth perception becomes an issue. And so navigating staircases, talk about risk for falls if you can't identify how deep the step is. So how do we rearrange the environment so that falls are less likely to take place, right? Again, that can be a whole seminar in itself. I'll just give you another highlight, is that one of the reasons people with dementia end up in the emergency room is from poisoning. And the poisoning comes from those little packets that we use for dishwashing detergents. They're colorful and they often look like candy, and they're ingested. And if it's not well secured, this is a major reason why people end up in the ER. So I work with families to literally go from cabinet to cabinet to see where potential safety issues may be in place. So safety in the home prevents crisis, and an important part to put on your safety net, right, on your list. Next, please. I spoke, a little bit about falls, but fall prevention is something we really want to avoid, especially in this day of COVID. I don't know if you've had that experience, but I've had one client fall in their private home and one within a care community. And it is much more difficult, right, for other family members to be with that person with dementia. They limit the amount of family members within the emergency room, if any at all. And so fall prevention strategies, there's a whole host of ways to prevent. Nothing's 100%, fail proof, but we can do lots of things in terms of, moving clutter, moving away throw rugs, looking at medications, a whole host of ways of preventing falls. Next, please. So this elopement thing, where, in the middle of the night, people are leaving, that part of the brain that was talked about, the frontal lobe, the reasoning, right? That says, I'm looking out my window right now and there's, gosh, I don't know, maybe 3 feet of snow right now and it's below zero. But someone with dementia maybe even go out in their underwear. That part of the brain is gone. The ability for safety awareness is gone. And if you can recall that brain with the large vacuoles in the middle that used to be ventricles, that's the reason for it. It isn't where they're, oh my goodness, giving you a hard time. But that part of the brain that literally controls safety awareness is diminished. And so that's the reason why people leave. They're looking for something else. They're looking for a sense of adventure, or I need to go pick up my children at school. People time travel back. And so there's an unawareness that I am in the state that I am and I need more assistance. And so elopement is a real problem. Next, please. And so whenever we can anticipate or prevent the risk, that's an important part of the safety net. Just a few thoughts here. Have a very recent picture available. Create a list of local friends, family to call in the event that elopement takes place. Have a list of favorite places the person normally goes to. Sew ID labels in clothes. Next, please. Having tracking devices, in addition to notifying your local police station in advance. But for example, I work with the Dementia Society of America, DSA. and they have an electronic tracking device that looks like a wristband, and it's free, and it's called Operation Keep Safe ID. The Alzheimer's Association has others. You can get more private tracking devices, but this is literally, you know, a GPS. There's even GPS in some shoes that can help identify where that person is. So it's not something we certainly want to think about. None of these potential crises are anything we want to think about. But imagine being in the midst of it without any idea of where to turn first, right? We're going to feel that overwhelming sense of, oh my goodness, I'm drowning. But if we have this safety net plan on paper, in writing, when you are in crisis mode, it's really hard to think through. And if you have a plan in place with people to call, what to do next, that's gonna help immensely than starting from scratch. Next, please. If you're not aware, if you haven't found that person, your loved one, within 15 minutes of searching around your immediate area, call, activate, you know, the 911, silver alert, activate the safe return. Don't assume that, well, I don't want to bother the police or others. No, it's much more important to activate and find out they're just, you know, in perhaps another level or in a room you haven't been to, or visiting a neighbor, right? I'd much rather err on the side of, you know, we were overly cautious than not. Next, please. Delirium. Delirium, often the other word is acute confusion. This could potentially be a crisis, meaning people are often hospitalized when they don't necessarily need to be. They're hospitalized, or, you know, they're brought to the ER and then put on all sorts of antipsychotics or brought to a psych unit, when in fact this could have been prevented way ahead of time. So what is delirium? Delirium means that you have sort of a baseline behavior, even for someone's dementia. So this is their normal mood, this is their normal response. Then sort of, it seems like out of the blue, this is the suddenness, where they lose that ability to pay attention, focus, or much more restless. They may hallucinate. There's a Loch Ness monster in the, you know, in the curtains, and it's fluctuating in nature. It seems, you know, over a period of hours, it seems that they're calm and then they're not. It just seems so unusual. This is not the dementia getting worse. Typically, what's underlying this sudden change are this list of underlying conditions. Number one, it's often a bladder infection. So think bladder infection. Other is hypoxia, meaning low oxygen levels. Another one is polypharmacy, meaning the person's on a variety of meds. Typically happens when one is on more than 5 at a time, and the interaction causes this, quote, delirium. And poorly controlled pain. This is a factor that many people are not aware of. This was the whole focus of my dissertation years and years ago, of looking at poorly controlled pain and how this presents itself as acute confusion. And unfortunately, people are brought to the ER when in fact, what could have actually modified or diminished all is that they were put on, let's say, routine Tylenol for an underlying arthritic issue. So think when you see a sudden change that fluctuates, it's a medical problem. And certainly talk to your healthcare provider, but it doesn't always indicate a need to go to the ER. To even make this more complicated, delirium comes in a couple forms. Not only this hyperactive, restlessness, but just the opposite, extreme opposite, meaning hypoactive, excessive drowsiness, unable to stay focused while awake. And then you can have a mix. So although this might sound complicated, and it is, know that it doesn't necessarily have to move into crisis mode. If you know in advance that this is a real possibility for people with dementia, you can talk through it with your healthcare provider and come up with other home care sort of remedies before they need to go to the ER, if they need to go at all. All right, enough said about delirium. Next, please. Dental care. Yes, it can be difficult to provide oral hygiene for someone with dementia, and that's a whole other coaching session. But when it doesn't happen, and dental caries, oral lesions can happen. And I would imagine all of us on this call have had some form of a toothache or an abscess in their life. And it is absolutely miserable. And that's all you can think about, that, you know, that oral pain, that toothache, right? That searing, feels like needles and knives. For someone with dementia, they may not understand where this pain is coming from. And so they're absolutely miserable and strike out. I've often been called into a variety of situations to do a consult when in fact, I've had their dentures removed and looked, and there are cavities and decay and lesions within the mouth that were not at all, it just wasn't looked at. And so this is a source of a potential crisis. I've walked into situations where they've stopped eating and they've come combative. And unfortunately, the person's been put on Seroquel or Ativan, or when they really needed to have a tooth pulled. So dental care, please don't forget about routine dental care. Next, please. So all of this is what we're trying to really prevent: hospitalizations, ER visits, when at all possible, right? Being in the hospital, being in the ER with dementia is a life in and of itself, and it's not a pretty one. And so this is where crisis management prevention really plays a real role. Knowing that at times, yes, that will have to happen, but when at all possible, let's prevent it, especially now when caregivers can rarely visit at the same time. Next slide. So because we're not 100%, right? We can't prevent everything. I encourage care providers to have a bag packed and ready to go, right? Leave it on a jet plane. My bags are packed and ready to go. Hopefully, this part of your safety net is never used, but it's ready. So you're not searching around for things in the middle of a broken leg, in the middle, of, if someone goes ahead, with, you name it, a bleeding ulcer, something like that. So clearly identify the bag. Make sure that there's a tag that might seem, like a small thing, but it's easy to lose. And that's the last thing you want to have happen. Include in there your power of attorney, contact information. If you have an advance directive, a POLST, provider order for life-sustaining treatment, medical history, a list of medical providers, current med list, faith practice, your insurance card, all copies of this. Perhaps a second set of glasses, hearing aids, and dentures, if at all feasible. I know that's expensive, but if not, maybe put a little Post-it to add into the bag if you can't be there on site. I also encourage families to make a a little note of 3 things that the person with dementia loves to talk about that can distract them. So I like talking about the Cubs versus the Sox. I have a dog, but and I don't like cats. 3 things that are meaningful that can be engaged into to help calm that person. Perhaps a comfort object. It may be a rosary. It may be, a small blanket, some token that will bring some sensory comfort to that person. And warm socks. It's cold in hospitals and emergency rooms. And yes, they, at times can provide those, but the wait until then can be a lot longer than you think, especially with COVID overload in emergency rooms. So anything that we can do to add to that comfort in advance will be appreciated. Next, please. Caregiver illness or incapacity. Certainly, we don't want to think about this as a caregiver, having been care provider for my mom and my brother. So I not only do this professionally, but as a personal care provider. The last thing I'd like to think is that, I needed help. I was ill. What's going to happen if I'm not here? So this is where that buddy system comes in. Someone to potentially step in, take your place, may not be forever, just short term. There are places that provide respite care, but this is why you need someone to go alongside and learn all this together. I understand how overwhelming all of this can be. And so it does really help to kind of bounce ideas back and forth. At the same time, that buddy can step in the event you become ill. Something we don't want to think about, but it's important to at least have that, quote, safety net. Next, please. So remember, educate, anticipate, partner, and plan. Educate, anticipate, partner, and plan. So now I'll open it up to questions, and and there's some contact information for me. The name of my private practice is called Through the Forrest. Yes, it's a take on my last name, Forrest with 2 R's. And I provide a service called Dementia Coach on Call. All that said, open to questions, comments, ideas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Forrest. We had one question regarding, Shar said, did you say that there is a free tracking device available? And if so, where could they get the information on it?
So look to the website Dementia Society of America. Dementia Society of America. And it's it looks for the safety return, safe return.
Is it not available also? Alzheimer's Association, I think, has something available also.
Yes, they do.
So that will be an additional option for that.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I think you had so many wonderful tips and thoughts. Do we have other questions out there? I think you've covered everything. I did appreciate let me take my video on here, I'm sorry. I did very much appreciate when you mentioned the 5 wishes. I have used that personally in the past, and I think it's a very nice way for families and loved ones to find out sort of what are their wishes, what are things that people want to have, and it's good for each of us as well. Because when things start to happen, then it's like, oh, I don't really know what they wanted or what we should be doing. So it
Yeah.
becomes, you know, difficult, obviously. I think we may have another question. We do. Oh, no, that was from Joyce. Thank you so much for a great presentation. Thanks, Joyce, for adding that. So yes, I think we had a lot of information. You certainly shared many ideas and thoughts, and hopefully alleviated some of the confusion that we all experience. And we're also here to help at ElderWorks, and we can always, of course, refer people back to Dr. Forrest and any other resources that are needed. So we're a little bit early. Does anyone else have additional questions? Or Dr. Forrest, is there anything else that you would like to add?
I think I want to leave people not feeling like they're ready to, you know, sort of jump off ship and be panicked. That's not the intent.
Right.
I think it's just helpful to be aware of the potential challenges, potential crisis going forward. It doesn't mean they're going to happen, but the more we can perhaps say, oh, what was I thinking? What, you know, you have it on paper, it really gives a little more peace of mind, especially when things become more chaotic.
I'm asking Emily to put up the contact slide again, if she can, because someone else we've had a couple of requests for your contact again. So we'll see if Emily can show it a moment. I'm not sure if she's still available. Dr. Forrest, would you like to give them at least your phone number and email again? And it will be on our website also. Oh, I think Emily.
Oh, there it is.
Thanks, Emily.
So there we go. So yeah, Janine at Dementia Coach on Call, or you can look the website Dementia Coach on Call, or 773-704-1834.